Hello, happy Halloween everybody. Today I'm going to review two horror films this year, Crimson Peak and Goosebumps. Let's start with Guillermo del Toro's new horror film, Crimson Peak. Now I am a big fan of Guillermo del Toro, and I think he is good at making horror, fantasy, and science fiction. In my opinion, Guillermo del Toro is the Mexican Tim Burton. Mimic was entertaining, Blade 2, Hellboy, and its sequel, Hellboy 2 The Golden Army, are all great films based on a comic book. I enjoy Blade 2 the same way I enjoy Blade 1. Pan's Labyrinth was a fantastic Mexican fantasy film. And of course, my favorite film directed by Guillermo del Toro is Pacific Rim. It feels so good to see giant robots fighting giant monsters. Now he has finally returned to make another horror film called Crimson Peak. So I became so excited to see this film when it was first announced, as well as seeing the trailers and the posters. I finally went to see it in IMAX and it was good, but certainly not one of Guillermo del Toro's best work, and I'm going to tell you why I think this way. The story of this film is a gothic horror, romance, and mystery that took place in the 20th century. It's about a young lady named Edith who had experienced ghosts before when she was a little girl. Ever since she was little, a ghost warned her about Crimson Peak. 14 years later, she became a novel writer and later met a charming man named Thomas. So both Edith and Thomas got married and lived in the big house along with Thomas's sister, Lucille. However, it turns out the big house they live in is haunted, and Edith felt that something is not right. The story was pretty decent in my opinion. There are some scary moments in the film though. Also, I felt some of the parts in the film did drag on. Now let's talk about the special effects of this film. I think the special effects of this film are very creative. I could definitely tell that the entire ghost in this movie is in motion capture. Some of the ghosts in this movie looks really creepy and some are covered in blood. The costume design definitely fit the mood during the time of the 20th century. The designs of the big house are both beautiful and scary at the same time. Oh, and of course, this movie had lots of blood. Now for the acting, directing, music. Let's start with Edith, played by that girl who played Alice in Alice in Wonderland, Mia Wasikowska. I think she did a nice job playing that character who was good at writing stories and investigate what really happened in that big haunted house. Then there's Thomas, played by Tom Hiddleston, who was from Warhorse and of course best known as Loki in the Marvel movies. I felt his portrayal as Thomas was very mysterious and his relation with Edith was dark and we didn't expect what will happen next. For Thomas's sister, Lucille, played by Jessica Chastain, was very creepy and suspicious. Now moving on to Edith's friend, Dr. Alan McMichael, played by Charlie Hunnam. This is the second time that he worked with Guillermo del Toro since they worked with each other in Pacific Rim. I must say, Charlie did a wonderful job playing that character who also investigates what really happened. Speaking of working with Guillermo del Toro twice, that guy who played one of the nerdy scientists in Pacific Rim, who also appeared in The Dark Knight Rises and Game of Thrones, was also in this movie as the detective. But he wasn't really in this movie too much. Guillermo del Toro did a good job for this film, but not as mind-blowing as his previous films. As for the music composed by that Spanish composer, it was very calm and haunting. Overall, I had a good time watching this movie. While I'm not really too much into love story movies, except for some, including Titanic, it was a fun movie to watch. Much like Tim Burton's Sleepy Hollow, this film reminds me of the Hammer horror films. However, I enjoy Sleepy Hollow more than Crimson Peak. Not as amazing or great as Guillermo del Toro's previous films, but I will say I enjoy Crimson Peak the same way I enjoy Mimic, as well as other horror films like Anaconda, Freddy vs. Jason, Evil Dead, the 2013 reboot, and last year's Dracula Untold. If you're a fan of horror or romance, you can go ahead and watch it or buy it or rent it, either way. So I give this movie 3 out of 5 nuclear bombs. Now let's talk about Goosebumps. Now I enjoy reading the Goosebumps books back when I was a kid in elementary school in the 90s. I also watched the Goosebumps TV show and it was enjoyable and will always be part of my childhood. When I first heard that a Goosebumps movie was going to be made, I was not too sure about that. When I later saw the trailers of this film, I pretty much had low expectations. I finally went to see it with my aunt, and I was actually surprised how awesome this movie is, and I'm going to tell you why I think this way. The story of this film is about a young teenage boy named Zach who moved to his new home with his mother after Zach's father passed away. When Zach moved to his new home, he met R.L. Stine and his daughter next door. R.L. Stine warned him not to come to his property. Zach later went to his new high school where he befriended a boy named Champ. One night, Zach and Champ trespassed in R.L. Stine's house and accidentally unlocked his books and unleashed all the creatures. So Zach, Champ, R.L. Stine, and R.L.'s daughter had decided to team up together to find the way to fight the creatures and send them back to where they belong. I felt the story of this film is Jumanji meets The Mummy, meets Gremlins, meets Casper, meets The Spiderwick Chronicles. The story was nothing really special. For the jokes in this film, there are some that are funny. Also, this film did have a twist. I had mixed feelings on the special effects in this film. There are some creatures in this film that looks creative, and there are some that looks too cheesy and outdated, like the two live-action Scooby-Doo movies. I do, however, enjoy the makeups of some of those creatures. The villain, Slappy the Dummy, was used as an animatronic, obviously. Now for the acting, directing, and music. Let's start with R.L. Stine, played by Jack Black, best known for movies like School of Rock, Peter Jackson's King Kong, Tropic Thunder, and the Kung Fu Panda movies. He did a very funny and clever job playing R.L. Stine, who was actually a real-life man who wrote all the Goosebumps books. But in this film, he is mysterious, protective, and kind of act like a grumpy person. Putting a real-life person in a fictional story was hilarious. That was very similar to Jackie Chan in my childhood favorite cartoon, Jackie Chan Adventure. Jack Black also provides the voice of the main villain, Slappy the Dummy. Slappy the Dummy is definitely the most evil, creepiest, and greatest villain in the Goosebumps franchise. Now moving on to Zach, played by Dylan Minetti. He did a nice job playing that character. Zach is a teenage boy who moved to a new place and become R.L. Stine's new neighbor and accidentally opened R.L.'s books that unleashed all those creatures created by R.L. Stine himself. For R.L. Stine's daughter, played by Albia Rush, I also think she did a good job, plus I think she's cute. Then there's Zach's friend, Champ, played by Ryan Lee, who was from Super 8. He's just a funny nerd teenage boy who does a lot of funny things. Zach's mom, played by Amy Ryan, and Zach's aunt, played by Jillian Bell, both are funny characters as well. Rob Letterman, who directed Shark Tale and Monsters vs. Alien, did an okay job directing this movie. The music composed by Danny Elfman was very haunting and fun to listen to, which is ironic that the music for this film almost sounds like the music of all the Tim Burton films. Overall, Goosebumps is an awesome movie. It's definitely the most enjoyable film to watch during the Halloween season. While I think Crimson Peak is a good movie, I enjoy Goosebumps more. If you're a fan of the Goosebumps books, go give it a watch. So I give Goosebumps 3.5 out of 5 nuclear bombs.